People often imagine that disrespect begins with an insult, an argument, or an obvious act of hostility, but that is almost never how it starts. Disrespect usually begins with something much smaller. It begins with a test. Human beings are constantly evaluating one another, often without realizing it. We observe reactions, measure limits, and unconsciously ask a simple question: how far can I go with this person? The answer to that question shapes almost every relationship we have. This tendency is rooted in psychology. In every social environment, whether in the workplace, among friends, or within families, people are looking for stability. They want to know who stands firmly on principle and who bends under pressure. A person who consistently abandons their convictions to avoid discomfort communicates something powerful. Even if unintentionally, they communicate that their boundaries are negotiable. Once that message is established, it spreads quietly. People become a little more demanding, a little more dismissive, a little less careful with their words. Rarely is it planned. It simply follows the logic of human nature. History reveals this pattern repeatedly. Influence is rarely determined by who speaks the loudest. It belongs to those whose limits are understood. The individual who remains composed while making it unmistakably clear where the line exists creates certainty. Certainty commands respect because it removes ambiguity. Others no longer waste time wondering whether they can manipulate the situation. They already know the answer. Many people misunderstand this dynamic because they confuse kindness with weakness. Genuine kindness is a deliberate choice made from a position of strength. Weakness is the inability to defend what matters. These are not the same thing. Someone who is endlessly accommodating without discernment is not displaying virtue. They are often revealing fear of rejection, fear of conflict, or fear of standing alone. Unfortunately, fear has a way of inviting precisely the treatment we hope to avoid. Notice the people who naturally command respect in any room. They are not always the most charismatic or physically imposing. Often, they speak less than everyone else. They do not rush to justify themselves. They do not chase approval. There is an unmistakable consistency between what they believe and how they act. That consistency creates predictability, and predictability creates trust. Even those who disagree with them understand that certain standards will not be compromised. The temptation is to believe that respect comes from convincing people to like you. But admiration built on approval is fragile. The moment pleasing others becomes your highest priority, you surrender control over your own identity. Every decision begins to depend on someone else's comfort rather than your own principles. That is a dangerous exchange because people instinctively recognize when someone has made acceptance their greatest need. The real objective is not to become intimidating. It is to become unmistakably clear. When your values are visible through your actions, when your boundaries remain steady regardless of circumstance, people stop testing them. Not because they fear your anger, but because they recognize your certainty. And certainty is one of the rarest forms of strength in a world filled with hesitation. Remember this: people rarely respect the boundaries you merely describe. They respect the boundaries you consistently defend. Once you understand that people naturally test boundaries, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why do so many intelligent, capable individuals fail those tests? The answer is often hidden beneath a quality our culture frequently celebrates: agreeableness. We are taught from an early age that being accommodating, avoiding conflict, and keeping everyone happy are signs of maturity. While cooperation is essential for any healthy society, there is a point where agreeableness ceases to be a virtue and becomes a liability. It quietly erodes your authority without you ever noticing it. The danger is not kindness itself. Kindness is powerful when it is voluntary. The danger emerges when your need to be accepted becomes greater than your commitment to your own principles. At that moment, every interaction becomes a negotiation in which you are always prepared to give something away. People sense this, often without conscious thought. Human beings are remarkably skilled at detecting hesitation. They notice when you apologize for things that require no apology. They notice when you laugh at disrespect to avoid creating tension. They notice when you say yes while your expression clearly wants to say no. Each of these moments appears insignificant on its own, but power is rarely lost in dramatic events. More often, it disappears through countless small concessions. Every unnecessary compromise teaches people what they can expect from you in the future. The first favor becomes the second expectation. The second expectation becomes an obligation. Before long, you find yourself living according to standards that other people have created for you. This is why excessive people-pleasing is so deceptive. It disguises itself as generosity while gradually weakening your position. You believe you are earning affection, yet what you often receive instead is familiarity without respect. There is a subtle difference between someone appreciating your kindness and someone assuming your compliance. Once people begin assuming your compliance, they stop valuing the sacrifices you make because those sacrifices become predictable. Observe individuals who possess genuine influence. They are not difficult for the sake of appearing powerful. They simply understand that every decision carries symbolic meaning. A single refusal, delivered calmly and without hostility, communicates something much larger than the situation itself. It tells others that your time has value, your attention has limits, and your principles are not available for negotiation. Ironically, people often trust those who occasionally disappoint them more than those who constantly seek to satisfy them. The person who never says no eventually becomes impossible to believe because everyone understands that endless agreement cannot be sincere. There is another psychological reality worth considering. People tend to value what requires effort to obtain. This principle extends beyond material possessions into human relationships. When your approval, your availability, and your energy are given away indiscriminately, they lose perceived value. Scarcity creates appreciation. Discernment creates respect. The goal is not to become cold or distant, but to become intentional. Let your generosity be a conscious choice rather than an automatic response. Many people fear that setting limits will cause others to leave, or sometimes it will. But those departures reveal something important. Relationships sustained only by your willingness to neglect yourself were never balanced to begin with. They depended on your silence, not your character. Losing such relationships is not failure, it is clarification. The paradox is simple. The moment you stop trying to make everyone comfortable is often the moment people begin taking you seriously. Respect grows where self-respect is visible, because the standards you set for yourself quietly become the standards others learn to follow. Never trade your principles for approval, because approval fades, but the habit of surrendering yourself can last a lifetime. If excessive agreeableness weakens your position, then the obvious question becomes, what makes someone resistant to manipulation in the first place? The answer is not sharper words, a more intimidating appearance, or an endless collection of persuasive techniques. It is something far deeper. It is the development of an identity that does not depend on the opinions of other people. The individual who cannot be easily manipulated is the one who has already decided who they are before anyone else attempts to define them. This is where many people lose their footing. They build their identity from external approval rather than internal conviction. They measure their worth by compliments, promotions, social status, or acceptance from those around them. As long as these things are present, they feel confident. But the moment criticism appears or approval disappears, their confidence begins to unravel. They are forced to adjust themselves constantly, trying to satisfy whoever holds influence in the moment. This creates a personality that is reactive instead of deliberate. Human nature has always been drawn to certainty. We instinctively trust those who appear grounded in something larger than temporary emotion. That does not mean they are stubborn or incapable of learning. It means their core values remain stable, even as circumstances change. There is an enormous difference between adapting your strategy and abandoning your principles. Wise people do the first. Insecure people often do the second. Consider how manipulation usually works. Rarely does it begin with force. It begins with emotional pressure. Someone attempts to make you feel guilty, ashamed, afraid, or desperate for approval. If your decisions are governed primarily by those emotions, your behavior becomes predictable. Others learn exactly which emotional buttons produce the response they want. They do not need to control your actions directly. They simply control your emotional state. The antidote is not emotional suppression, it is emotional discipline. Discipline allows you to experience fear without surrendering to it. It allows you to hear criticism without immediately assuming it is truth. It allows you to remain patient when others are trying to provoke an impulsive reaction. In many ways, real strength is measured less by what you can do than by what you refuse to let others make you do. This kind of identity is built quietly through repeated acts of integrity. Every time your actions align with your values, you strengthen your sense of self. Every promise you keep to yourself becomes evidence that your character is reliable. Gradually, your confidence stops depending on applause because it is supported by something much more durable, your own record of consistency. There is an interesting paradox here. The less desperately you seek validation, the more naturally respect tends to follow. People are drawn to individuals who appear internally anchored because such people are difficult to influence through pressure or intimidation. They cannot be bought with compliments, nor can they be controlled by rejection. Their center of gravity exists within themselves. This does not mean becoming isolated or indifferent to others. We all benefit from advice, feedback, and meaningful relationships. But there is a profound difference between listening to wisdom and surrendering your identity. One strengthens your judgment, the other dissolves it. Over time, people begin to recognize this inner stability. They realize that threats will not move you, flattery will not distract you, and criticism alone will not break your resolve. At that point, manipulation becomes too costly to attempt because there is no obvious weakness to exploit. Your greatest defense is no longer something you say, it is something you consistently embody. Remember this, when your identity is built on values instead of validation, you stop asking the world who you should be, and the world begins accepting who you already are. Once your identity is rooted in principles rather than validation, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop feeling compelled to react to every slight, every criticism, every attempt to provoke you. This is where true power starts to separate itself from the illusion of power. Most people associate strength with visible force, with raising your voice, winning arguments, or dominating a room. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that those who possess genuine influence rarely waste energy proving it. Their greatest advantage lies in their ability to remain composed while others lose control. Emotional reactions are deeply revealing. They expose your fears, your insecurities, and the areas where you can be manipulated. The person who can provoke your anger at will has gained a certain degree of control over you. The person who can make you desperate to defend yourself has already shifted the balance of power. Every impulsive reaction gives away information, and information is one of the most valuable currencies in any human interaction. This is why disciplined restraint has always been associated with authority. It creates uncertainty in the minds of others. When someone cannot predict your emotional response, they become more cautious. They begin observing instead of assuming. They think twice before crossing boundaries because they no longer know what outcome to expect. Ironically, calmness often generates more influence than aggression precisely because it is so difficult to manipulate. Think about the people who leave the strongest impression on you. They are not necessarily the loudest voices in the room. More often, they are the individuals who speak with intention and remain silent when silence serves them better. They understand that words lose value when they are spent too freely. Every unnecessary explanation weakens a position that was already clear. Every attempt to justify yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you only strengthens their confidence that they have unsettled you. There is also a deeper psychological principle at work. Human beings naturally mirror emotional states. Panic spreads quickly. Anger invites anger. Anxiety creates uncertainty in everyone nearby. But composure has the opposite effect. A person who remains steady in moments of tension subtly changes the emotional climate around them. Others begin adjusting themselves in response. Without issuing commands or making threats, they become the emotional center of the interaction. That is a form of leadership far more enduring than intimidation. Of course, composure should never be mistaken for passivity. Remaining calm does not mean accepting mistreatment or avoiding necessary confrontation. It means choosing your response instead of allowing circumstances to choose it for you. There are moments when decisive action is required, and those moments carry far greater weight when they emerge from deliberate judgment rather than wounded pride. A controlled response communicates confidence. An uncontrolled reaction often communicates insecurity, no matter how justified the emotion may be. Notice how experienced negotiators, military commanders, and accomplished leaders often behave under pressure. They slow down when everyone else speeds up. They ask questions instead of making accusations. They conserve their energy while others exhaust themselves emotionally. This discipline is not accidental. They understand that clarity disappears when emotion takes command, and the person who preserves clarity usually preserves the advantage. Cultivating this level of self-mastery requires practice. It means resisting the urge to answer every insult immediately. It means becoming comfortable with brief silence instead of rushing to fill it. It means recognizing that not every battle deserves your attention. Some conflicts exist only to pull you away from your purpose. The strongest individuals are not those who fight every challenge. They are those who know which challenges deserve their strength. Over time, people begin to recognize this quiet discipline. They stop expecting dramatic reactions because they understand that your emotions are not available for public negotiation. Your calm becomes a statement in itself, a silent reminder that your actions are guided by judgment, not impulse. Remember this: anyone can display power in a moment of anger, but only those who master themselves possess a strength that endures when the moment has passed. By this point, you have established clear boundaries, resisted the temptation to seek constant approval, built an identity rooted in principles, and learned the discipline of controlled strength. Yet there is one final element that determines whether others truly respect those boundaries or merely acknowledge them in theory. That element is consequences. Human nature pays close attention to patterns. We quickly learn which actions produce results and which produce none. If disrespect is consistently met with inaction, people unconsciously conclude that the boundary was never real to begin with. This is one of the most common mistakes people make. They believe that clearly communicating their limits is enough. They explain what they will not tolerate, they express disappointment, and they hope their words alone will change another person's behavior. Sometimes they do, but more often they do not. Words without action gradually lose their authority. Every empty warning weakens the next one. Eventually, people stop listening altogether because experience has taught them that nothing meaningful follows. Think about how trust develops in any system. It is built through consistency. We trust the sunrise because it appears every morning. We trust a reliable friend because they repeatedly do what they say they will do. Respect operates according to the same principle. People believe your boundaries only after they have seen you defend them consistently. It is not your declaration that convinces them, it is your pattern. Notice that this has nothing to do with revenge. Revenge is emotional. It seeks to satisfy wounded pride. Consequences, by contrast, are measured and intentional. They exist to protect your standards, not to punish another person. There is an important distinction between reacting out of anger and responding out of principle. One is driven by impulse, the other by clarity. Imagine someone repeatedly interrupts you in meetings, dismisses your contributions, or ignores commitments they have made to you. If each occurrence is overlooked in the hope of keeping the peace, you unintentionally reinforce the behavior. You teach them that the cost of disrespect is negligible. But if you calmly address the pattern, limit future opportunities for them to repeat it, or withdraw your time and cooperation when appropriate, you change the equation. Suddenly, disrespect carries a price, not because you became hostile, but because you refused to reward behavior that violated your standards. This is a principle that extends beyond individual relationships. Organizations function through consequences. Families rely on consequences. Every stable society depends on predictable responses to actions. Without them, rules become suggestions and standards become opinions. Human beings are remarkably adaptive. We adjust our behavior based on the incentives and disincentives around us. Whether we admit it or not, we learn from what is tolerated. There is another subtle truth here. Some people will accuse you of changing once you begin enforcing your boundaries. They may say you have become distant, difficult, or uncooperative. In reality, what has changed is not your character, but their expectations. They had grown comfortable benefiting from your reluctance to say no. When that reluctance disappears, they mistake your self-respect for hostility. Do not confuse their disappointment with evidence that you are wrong. Of course, not every act of disrespect deserves a dramatic response. Wisdom lies in proportion. Minor misunderstandings can often be resolved through honest conversation. Genuine mistakes deserve grace. But repeated patterns of disregard require decisive action. The key is consistency. If your response changes according to your mood, people become confused. If it remains guided by your principles, people learn exactly where you stand. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. People stop testing you as often, not because they fear an emotional outburst, but because they recognize that your standards are dependable. They understand that crossing certain lines will alter the relationship in predictable ways, that certainty creates respect long before conflict ever arises. In the end, your boundaries are not defined by what you say. They are defined by what you are willing to protect. When your actions consistently match your principles, you teach the world a lesson it never forgets. Respect is not requested, it is reinforced. When people first hear a title like How to Make People Fear Disrespecting You, they often imagine that the goal is intimidation. They picture becoming colder, more aggressive, more dominant. But if you have followed this journey carefully, you will have noticed that the destination is something entirely different. The objective has never been to make people fear you. It is to become the kind of person whose standards are so clear, whose character is so consistent, and whose actions are so predictable that people understand disrespect is simply not an option. There is an important distinction here. Intimidation depends on appearances. Authority depends on substance. Someone can appear powerful for a short time through forced status or loud displays of confidence. But those forms of influence are fragile because they rely on circumstances that can change overnight. A title can be taken away, wealth can disappear, physical strength fades. The person who built their identity on these external advantages eventually discovers that fear alone is an unstable foundation. Character, however, operates differently. It cannot be borrowed, and it cannot be faked for long. It is built through thousands of small decisions that no one applauds. It is built every time you keep your word when breaking it would be easier. Every time you refuse to compromise your principles for convenience. Every time you remain calm when others expect you to lose control. These moments seem insignificant while they are happening, yet together they create something incredibly rare, a reputation. Reputation is one of the most valuable forms of power because it begins working before you ever enter the room. People carry stories about you long before they meet you. They remember whether you are dependable or unreliable, disciplined or impulsive, fair or unpredictable. Over time, your reputation becomes a kind of invisible force. Others adjust their behavior not because you demand it, but because experience has taught them what to expect. This is why competence matters just as much as confidence. There are many people who speak with certainty but possess very little ability. Eventually, reality exposes them. Real authority emerges when confidence is supported by skill. The more capable you become, the less you need recognition. Your work speaks for you. Your decisions carry weight because they are consistently grounded in judgment rather than ego. Competence gives substance to your boundaries, making them far more difficult to dismiss. Integrity completes the picture. Without integrity, competence can become manipulation and confidence can become arrogance. Integrity ensures that your strength serves a purpose larger than personal pride. It means your standards apply equally to yourself and to others. You do not demand respect while behaving disrespectfully. You do not insist on honesty while making exceptions for your own convenience. This consistency is what makes your character believable. There is also a profound sense of freedom that comes from living this way. When your identity is no longer dependent on approval, you stop performing for an audience. You no longer waste energy trying to impress people who have no intention of valuing you. Instead, you invest that energy in becoming more disciplined, more knowledgeable, more reliable, and more courageous. Ironically, this inward focus often produces the outward respect that endless self-promotion never could. Some people will still misunderstand you. Some will dislike your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. Others may even resent the confidence you have developed because it reminds them of compromises they have made in their own lives. Accept this without bitterness. Universal approval has never been the measure of a meaningful life. The opinions that matter most will come from those who recognize strength without cruelty, confidence without arrogance, and discipline without unnecessary aggression. In the end, people do not hesitate before crossing your path because they are afraid of your anger. They hesitate because they recognize your integrity. They know your standards are real, your principles are stable, and your actions consistently reflect your words. That is a form of influence that cannot be manufactured, only earned. So, do not strive to become someone others fear. Strive to become someone whose character is so unwavering that disrespect simply has no place to stand. Because when you master yourself, the world quietly learns that your respect is not something to be challenged, it is something to be deserved.